Thank you. We are the Saltways, as explained by Laura. So we are a production company and we make ethical and effective films for the third sector. My background is actually working in charities. So I used to work in several small charities, but I was working in one in particular, which is a youth homeless charity. And I was in fundraising and comms and started to use my phone, kind of capture little bits of content to help with comms and fundraising, quickly realized how effective that was. And then went on to start the Saltways to help other charities on their content creation journeys. But the reason we designed this course or this workshop was because I really wished that there'd been something like this for me then, and it would have saved me so much time and tears and hours of watching YouTube videos. Today we're going to talk you through how to create effective content using just your phone. And there's lots of reasons why we encourage you to do this. One is obviously to connect with your supporters on a different level. It's more engaging, but also I think there's this real shift in the moment at the moment in the third sector that supporters and audiences are wanting to see more authentic, raw, kind of behind the scenes style footage. So even the bigger charities are starting to spend a lot more time and energy and resource on this. I think it's a skill that all charities should be doing. But I think as smaller organisations, it's kind of you can really use this as a superpower because you are on the ground a lot more. You'll soon see the results once you start getting into the culture of just capturing content using your phone. Next slide, please, Julia. Sorry. And this is kind of part of our mission that all charities should be able to create films that have an impact without heavy production or effects. And if you give people the space to tell their story, you'll get the results you need. And that kind of comes from our ethical filmmaking perspective as well. That you don't have to have, as much as we can make films like that, and we do, you don't have to have lots of expensive equipment, lighting. You can still create effective and engaging content literally just from using your phone. We're just going to quickly touch on ethical storytelling and ethical filmmaking before we get into the practical side of things, because I think it's helpful. It's a really important part of who we are and what we do as an organisation. And I think most of third sector organisations that we speak to or have worked with or in, being ethical obviously is really important. So firstly, the things to consider before you start creating any content is consent. And that means people's fully informed consent, especially if you're working with vulnerable people. You need to make sure that they are able to give their consent, or that there's a caregiver that can give their consent, and that they really do understand what the content that you're creating is going to be used for. So it's really important that you're transparent and explain to people up front, this is going to be used on our social media for up to 2 years. We're also going to pull stills from it. We're also going to put something on our website. Anybody that's featured in your content or your filming or photography needs to be aware that their image is being used and how it's being used. There are ways around it. So if you're filming an event, or if it's something where there's, it's a crowd, then you can just put up signage that says, we're filming here today. Let us know if you don't want to be filmed. But if you are, and obviously if someone does identify themselves and say, I don't want to be in it, you need to make sure they're not. But if you are interviewing people, you do need to get their written or verbal, ideally both, consent to them being filmed. And a lot of what we do is around co-production. So that involves, if you are working with service users, clients, volunteers, that they feel like they're really part of the process, and it's not just something that you kind of turn up, film them, and then there's a film just posted on social media of them 2 weeks later. So bringing them along for the journey really helps with that buy-in as well, especially if you're struggling to get people to want to be on camera. As if they feel like they're part of it, then you're more likely to get them to engage and want to be filmed and tell their story or talk about how you've helped them as an organisation. And then I'm just going to show this kind of short film that introduces what we do. And then after that, I think it would just be nice if we kind of go around and you introduce yourselves and tell us a bit about the organisation that you work with, and if you've created content before. So I'll just get Yulia to show us this short film of it introduces what we do as an organisation, which is a mixture of filmed and stuff on phone as well in this.
There is a tendency in some documentary filmmaking and in the charity sector for you to be viewing someone through a lens, which you are practically, but you want the feeling when you're telling ethical storytelling that you're with someone and they're telling you their story, and it's done with respect.
Give people space and time, because those are the two most important things. And I think just treating the story with respect is really important to me.
You want people to care, then you just let someone see the human behind the story.
Great, thanks, Julia. So before we get into what we're going to be going through today in the sections, would you all mind just kind of popping it in the chat or unmuting yourselves and saying which organisation you're from and if you've already started creating content before?
I'm happy to go first if anyone else doesn't mind.
Great, thanks, Emma.
So I previously worked for a larger charity called Seashell in Stockport, which I left like 12 months ago. So I've gone more into some sort of consultancy work. But at Seashell, when I was there, I did quite a lot of working with a marketing team, helping to create videos for various different projects that I was working on. But I'm currently now working with an organisation called Lusu Sports Limited, and they are a small team. There's kind of like 3 of us, and we are we deliver training and also got our own equipment to deliver inclusive sports and activities. So we train teaching assistants and coaches, sports clubs, and many different sort of areas within sport to make physical activity fully inclusive with the sports and sort of activities we run. So I've sort of come on board with them over the past couple of years in various different ways. But we're now exploring with Sector Free, hopefully. I've just sort of inquired with you guys about having a sort of CIC arm of the organisation, because I feel that could be the next step for us really to move forward. So just really interested in creating some, further content that, if we go down that route, that, how we promote the organisation in a sort of positive light, which, is a lot of the stuff that you were saying before about consent and all that is really key with some of the disabled people that we work with, especially within schools. There's lots of red tape and barriers, isn't there, to sort of navigate, which can be quite, sometimes you think, well, maybe I just won't bother doing it, or, and it can be quite hard, but just finding some simpler ways really to capture some of that, because that is really powerful, I think, and especially when young people or young adults see somebody else who's physically active, it especially on social media or in a video, it can really be quite profound and say, right, well, I can get in that as well. So yeah, just really interested to hear. And also from another side of things, I've been working with my friend around her podiatry work, and I currently last week was doing some filming for her social media, and realized, like you say, starting to go on YouTube videos and look through all that stuff, that there's just so much stuff to sort of navigate where you are and how it looks good. So any hints and tips would be really good. So thank you.
Great, thanks, Gemma. How about you, Hannah?
So I'm Hannah, and I also work in sport. So that's great, because it's usually just me that works in sport, Gemma. I run an organisation in squash, and I'm currently building a community of women in squash. And video is something that I am really uncomfortable with. However, particularly to build this community of women. It's really important that we're able to share our stories, and video is going to be really important to do that. It's not about the sport. Sport is the vehicle to connect these women together. It's about mental well-being through squash. The company itself, the Club Squash, is a coaching company, but the arm of it that is being grown is this community of fantastic women. And we want to share our stories and encourage more women in a nurturing way. And I want to be able to do that through storytelling on video.
Well, you're
We're
in the
a
right place.
CIC. We're a CIC, Gemma. So if you ever want to chat about that, then please do. We've had a lot of support from Sector 3 as well, as Laura will tell you. So yeah.
So yeah, definitely like to meet. That'd be great.
Lovely. How about you, Tanya?
Hi, so I'm Tanya, and I'm actually in the process of setting up my CIC for South Asian women with a friend. So I've attended a workshop with Sector 3 before on picking volunteers, so still in the early stages, but gathering some ideas on how I can target the right audiences and the right volunteers. So I think this is a great workshop to start that. I am quite confident on video, but I think it's more about understanding more ethical filmmaking, like you've already covered, in terms of getting consent and women sharing their stories and connecting with each other. So yeah, thank you.
Brilliant. Okay. So we're gonna get started, and I just wanted to say, if you want to ask questions, we're a small group, so you can pop it in the chat or put your hand up or unmute. We can do it like that, but there will be time at the end to ask questions as well. But don't feel like you have to hold your breath if there's something burning that you're like, I do not understand what you're talking about. Then just please pop it in the chat and we can go through it as we're going through. So basically, we're gonna break this down into 3 sections, which is, it sounds very technical: pre-production, production, and post-production, which basically just means planning, doing, and then editing and what to do with it after. Next slide, please, Julia. Thank you. So I'm going to go through the pre-production, and this basically, just means how are we going to plan this content. And there's some questions that that I use when I'm going to be making a film, that can help you guide that. And I think as much as we would encourage you to go out there and just start capturing stuff, in terms of your resource and your time and all the things around consent, it is much better to have some sort of plan as to what you're creating and why you're creating it. So the first thing you want to ask yourself is, why are we making this content? Is that, to tell someone's story? Is it to recruit volunteers? Is it to make people aware of a fundraising event that's happening? Is it about a campaign? Because while you're making that content will dictate the tone, it will dictate what you're filming. So it's really important to think about, well, why are we making this? And actually having these questions and answering them before you make the content will also help you when you're editing it, giving everything a bit of a frame and making sure that you're including things within your content that goes back to this, well, why are we doing it? And then you want to think about who are we talking to, and that by that I mean your audience. So is it that you're speaking to potential volunteers? Is it that you're speaking to grant funders? Is it that you're speaking to corporate supporters? Because the way that you speak to them is going to be different, and the way things that they want to know about your organisation is going to be different. So for example, if it's you're trying to recruit volunteers, the best thing for you to do is to make content that is aimed at them by showing them the benefits of volunteering and the impact that that can have on them and the organisation and society as a whole. And if you were talking to corporate supporters, it's better to speak in to show impact, but also about what the benefits to them would be as potential corporate supporters. If it's a fundraising campaign, it's always better to feature stories and be a bit more emotive. So think about who you're talking to, who your audience is, and then how do we want them to feel. This is such an important one, and it will again help shape what you film and how you edit it. So how do you want them to feel? Do you want them to feel inspired? Do you want them to feel educated? Do you want them to feel angry? Do you want them to feel inspired to take action? Do you want them to feel emotional? Again, that's going to all depend on why you're making it and who you're talking to. And then what is the message? there's a real tendency, I think, when charities are making films or anyone's making a film, to try and pack in everything that you do into this, 1 to 2 minute piece of content, and it's just overwhelming. People won't remember it. What you need to do really is just try and focus on one key message. So, like I said, if it is volunteer recruitment, that's your message, and that's what you're going to be speaking about. You're not going to be going into everything that you do, like on a Tuesday we do this and a Monday we do that, because people won't remember. They'll stop watching and they'll carry on scrolling. Think about one key message that you want people to take away from that piece of content. And then how are we going to deliver it? Is it going to be someone speaking to camera? Is it going to be filming bits of footage of, you in action, or maybe a sports session? Is it going to be a day in the life of with a volunteer or a staff member? So thinking about what your message is and how you're going to deliver it, again, will help you plan what the kind of content is you're going to be capturing. And now I'm going to hand over to Julia for the production part of it. But we can, if you've got any questions about the pre-production, we can go through all that again towards the end.
Amazing. Thank you, Emma. So I'm Julia. I'm one of the videographers with the Saltways, and I'm going to take you through the production process, which is basically just the doing, like Emma said, of actually filming and recording the content. Okay, so when we're filming on our mobile phone, we've all done it at one point or another, but we probably haven't paid close attention to some of the settings, and I do want to take you through this. So so here we've got two images. On the left we've got the iPhone side of things, and on the right hand side we've got the Android side of things, and I want us to pay attention to the frame rate and the resolution. And what is the frame rate? The frame rate is how many pictures your recorder, your phone is taking per second to create that illusion of movement. And in our case, on the left-hand side in the right-hand corner, you can see that it says 30. So we've got 30 frames per second that it's filming at, and that is about the setting that we want to go for. Sometimes if you check your phone, sometimes it might be set to 60 frames. And if you're on the slow-mo setting, which we don't want to use for this in particular, it might even be at 120 frames per second. So we don't really need that. And one thing to be aware of is also that if you have a higher frame rate or resolution, that your files are going to be a lot bigger. And so with that, they might be, they might take up more space when you're storing them, but also when you're editing, they might have some compatibility issues with your editing software. So what we recommend is 30 frames per second. And then for the resolution is how many pixels we have in the image. And so basically how good the quality and how high the resolution is. So here, most phones nowadays film at 4K, which is amazing. Some of them even go to 6K or 8K. I think that might be overkill. That might be too large of a resolution. Again, the files are going to be horrendously large. And also some editing softwares and apps might not work with them. So 4K is absolutely fine. Some phones, my phone, for example, is quite an old Samsung that I've got. It only films at in HD, 1080, and if that's the only option we have, then that's what we'll go with. Again, if it's going to be posted on social media, like 1080 is probably what it will end up being like shown at anyways, so that is fine. But what are the upsides of filming in 4K rather than 1080? Does anybody know what we can do potentially if we have 4K footage or 6K footage even? No. So what it does is, because we have a higher resolution, is we can, in the editing process, we can zoom in, we can crop the image without losing too much quality. So because we have so many pixels in the image, we can crop in, we can zoom in a little bit, and that can be quite helpful, especially if, let's say, we're filming an interview and maybe the framing isn't quite what we want, or maybe there's something in the corner that's really distracting and we want to crop it out. If we're filming in 4K, we can do that. If we're in 1080, and we try and crop it, we might lose some of the quality and it might be noticeable. Whereas when we're doing it in 4K, nobody will really notice because the resolution is still good enough. So that can be really helpful, and that's the reason why sometimes videographers choose to film in 6K or 8K, because then they can crop in even more, and that can be quite helpful. But in our case, I don't think that's really something that we need. So that is just setting the frame rate and resolution. We do this depending on the different phones. Generally, just if you go into your camera and you find where it says 4K or 30 and you click on that, you can change that. But sometimes it does depend on the model, and sometimes it's just worth Googling how to do this for your particular model of phone. Next, we're going to set up grid lines. So you might already have this set up on your phone. But in case you don't, this is something as a videographer that I have on my camera and that I use all the time. And it can be really helpful for framing your shots. And so basically what it does is we've got 2 horizontal lines and then 3 vertical lines, and that splits the image into 9 different rectangles, and that is for framing. I don't know if you've heard about the rule of thirds at all. This is something when it comes to composition. It's like a theory of composition, and basically it says that we try and align the subject with one of the vertical lines, like either left or right, and then from a composition aspect, we want to have like some free space on one of the other sides. You can look into it a little bit more, but generally it's just about composing an image, a frame that's pleasing to the eye, and with those grid lines that can be really helpful to try and align with them. Also, if we're filming outside and we have a horizon, or also inside, they also help us to make sure that we're kind of not crooked. Sometimes when you're holding the phone or it's on the tripod, it might be positioned a little bit like this, and so the grid lines also help us just to make sure that we're kind of steady and straight up. Again, on the left hand side here, we have the iPhone side of things, and on the right hand side we've got the Android. So on an iPhone, you go into your settings, then you go to camera, and then it says grid. So if you see on the second image on the left, at the bottom it says composition, and there it says grid. Then on the iPhone also, we want to set the format to most compatible, which again just makes sure that when we get to the editing side of things, that it will be compatible with most editing softwares. On the right-hand side, we've got the Android side of things, where we go into the camera and then to settings, and there it will say grid lines, and we'll turn that on. Again, if your phone doesn't have those 2 options, then it might be worth just Googling it and looking it up. Can I just check how many of you have an iPhone? 1, 2, 3. And everybody else has an Android, yeah? Yeah, one, 2 Androids. Okay, great. So we're quite evenly split between the iPhone and Android. Okay, so next, we've got a few terms that might be coming up during the production process, which is focus, exposure, and zoom. And you probably already know some of them, but I just want to make sure that we know what they mean. So focus is how sharp parts of the image are. Exposure is just like how light or dark the image is, and zoom is basically just zooming in or out. When it comes to the zoom, so when we're using cameras, we've got different lenses. So either we can zoom in by using a lens that's that goes a little bit closer in, or we can also use a zoom lens and sort of adjust the zoom that way. On the phone, there's actually only the option of like pinching in, right? We pinch in to zoom in on an image, and we don't actually recommend that you ever use that, because all it does, it diminishes the quality of the image, right? So when we have like our full shot, and if we zoom in, we lose a little bit of quality, and that is something that we can do in the post-production process, right? So like I said, when we're filming in 4K, we can zoom in, but all we do if we're doing it while we're filming is that we take away the option of having other things there, of having that wider shot, right? So so we recommend that if we want to zoom in, that we do it in the post-production process, or even better, if we know we want something a little bit closer in, that we just go closer and just get a closer shot of the subject. In terms of focus and exposure, there is something that can be really, really helpful, and that's the auto exposure and autofocus lock. And again, you might have already used that. It's basically when we tap on our subject that we want to be in focus and properly exposed, and then we lock it. So here on the left-hand side, you can see the AEAF lock. So that is that. And all that does is it makes sure that while we're filming, so let's say we're filming an interview and we just want the person who's speaking to always be in focus, and we don't want the autofocus to suddenly shift to, you know, something that might be happening in the background, then it just locks that in for the entirety that we're filming. And then once we stop the recording, it sort of, then it goes away again. But during the filming, it just means that we don't have a shift in either the exposure or in the focus. And here on the left-hand image, we have the dog in focus. So you can see there's that little square over the dog, and the dog is in focus. And then you can also see that the dog is aligned with the lines, with the right-hand sort of grid line here. And then on the right-hand side, the focus is on the little Buddha, and we can see that the dog is a little bit out of focus here. And then there's also like a zoomed-in image of the little Buddha. So that is something that can be incredibly helpful, and it's such a simple thing that yeah, just can make a big difference. Okay, next we get to what can we film, and that is something where the pre-production comes in like incredibly handy. All those questions that we were asking of why are we filming this? Who is our audience? What are we trying to bring? What is the message that we're bringing across? Is really important to make those kind of decisions. First of all, we've got pieces to camera. This is so popular, and especially on social media, it's something that, you know, is one of the most popular ways of telling a story, because it's so accessible, it's so personable, and yeah, so someone authentically talking to the camera or talking to someone off screen, which we do like documentary style kind of interviews quite a lot, can be a really effective way of storytelling. Then we've got behind the scenes, and this can be pretty much anything that's happening. When we're filming for a shoot, and we've done the interviews, we try and film everything that's going on around people, just like people making tea and having a conversation. Maybe you're at an event, maybe you're at a fundraiser, and some of the speakers are arriving, and you might decide to just film them, greeting people, getting out of the car, getting ready for the event. It's one of those things where I think just shifting our mindset to get into content creator mode is sometimes the most important thing. Just looking around and being like, what could be interesting content? What could come in handy during the editing process? What is something that we might want to add to our little video, or just do a little behind the scenes video? And I know that can be really tricky when you've got another job that you're doing. And you're on site for again, let's go back to like a fundraising event, and you have your job that you're doing, but then we got to put on that other hat that is like, oh yeah, we got to think about creating content, and that can be really tricky sometimes. And that's why sometimes you might decide just to have a designated person whose job it is just to do that. But at the same time, it's something that we can do, and that's pretty amazing that nowadays with the technology, it's quite easy for us to capture this.
Yeah, I'd add as well there, sorry, Julia, that the things that you might as an organization just think are boring because it's just what you do, to people who don't know your world, it's really interesting, and people are craving more of that transparency, like I said. So I think one of the most popular pieces of content I made when I was working in a charity was just people coming to drop off donations of like toothpaste and clothes and stuff for young people, and then the staff taking it into the back of where we stored it, explaining why we did that, and then a young person coming, you didn't see them because of ethical reasons, but you saw the back of their head just taking some toothpaste and I think some sanitary products. And that was a really popular piece of content, but for us that was like what we did every day, so we were like, that's not going to be very interesting for people, but people loved it because they're like, I didn't know you did that, that's amazing. So I think it's just thinking about even the stuff that you might not find interesting, show your supporters, your audience, your world, and that can be really engaging, and a lot easier for you not to have to think too much about interviewing people or getting consent. Like, just show them the actual behind the scenes of what you do as an organization.
That's so true. Yeah, thank you, Emma. And I think it's sometimes quite easy to underestimate how much people love to see what's going on behind the scenes, and to really get an idea of like what's happening with, even if they give donations and stuff, they might be, oh, it's so nice for them to see what's actually happening with them. And then, we want to think visual. How can you support the story visually? So especially if you have an idea of what your story is going to be, what your message is going to be. Again, coming back to that pre-production, during the pre-production process, we might already think about what kind of footage could be supporting the story that we're telling or the message that we're trying to give. And then to keep that in mind, and when you see something that's happening, about, like Emma was just telling us about, the behind the scenes of just someone, taking those donations. We always want to think about how can we support the story that we're telling in a visual way. And that might include when you're, maybe writing out a list of shots that you would like to get, thinking ahead and being like, oh, this might be happening on the day that we're filming. Let's try and capture that, or maybe even encouraging people to do something like make a cup of tea and be like, oh, let's try and get that.
Yeah, and I think as well, if you're interviewing someone and it's someone telling their story, it's always good to think about other bits of footage you can capture with them to bring their story to life. So if it's someone, for example, that is come to a sports session, you're doing a sit-down interview with them, but also, can you film them arriving? Can you film them actually engaging in the activity? Can you film them talking to other people? So seeing that interaction between them. So it's not just, you haven't just got this sit-down interview, you've got all these other little bits of footage that are going to help when it comes to editing to just make it a bit more visually engaging, and also just help you if you're having to cut around bits and pieces.
Exactly. And I think, and it's also worth a lot of times leaving the camera running while people are just like getting set up. I think we see it in documentaries sometimes, where people kind of just come in and they get sort of set up in there for the interview. And all these little things can be worth capturing. And we don't have to use it in the editing process, but it could be that something interesting happens, and we just want to make sure that we're there to capture it. Great. Lighting is something that's really, really important, and it makes a big difference for the quality of your content. And we have, obviously, one of our biggest light sources is the sun. And so if we have a look at those two images on the right hand side, we can tell that the first one is obviously not well lit. Do we have any ideas why that might be? Oh, Gemma, I can't hear you.
Is it because the light's behind, essentially?
Yeah,
So-
exactly. We've got this. We've got sort of that window right behind, right? And so we have a really strong light source from behind, and then not much lighting from the front. And what that does is on the phone camera, it kind of then, you know, it automatically sets. But also, on to be fair, also it would be the same issue with the video camera. If the backlighting is so strong, then we need either like equally strong front lighting, or the subject is just going to be underexposed. So on the second image, there's a lot. The lighting is a lot softer, right? The face is well lit, and there is a window there, but the lighting coming through is, first of all, it's a little bit further away, and the lighting isn't like as strong coming through. So we want the lighting to be soft and even. We want it to be as flattering as possible, and we don't want any like really strong light sources directly onto the person. So that includes also direct sunlight. When we're filming outside, it's not always that like the more light and the more sunlight, the better on the person, because when we have really strong lighting, it also creates strong shadows, right? And that is something that we're trying to avoid. So when we're filming outside, we usually try and go into like an area where there's a bit of a shadow, or to be fair, we're in the UK here, so it's usually overcast, and that is actually perfect lighting because it creates that soft lighting, right? And I'm, for example, where I'm sat right now, I've positioned myself, I've got like a window here. So I've got here my garden window, and if I position myself, let's see, right here, you can see how the camera on my computer, it goes, my light is now a lot darker, and suddenly we've got that really bright background. I do have lights on here, top lights, so my face is still lit, but if I turn myself this way, like where I'm sitting, we can tell that just the natural light just it looks a lot better. And one thing that's really important when it comes to lighting is, again, just building that awareness of where our light sources are and what they're doing. So if we have any windows, we gotta, you know, pay attention to how much light is coming through. It could be that it's evening, or like here, that it's like, you know, 4 o'clock, 5 o'clock, and the sun is already going down. Then that's also something that we need to be aware of if the light is changing. Because if we're having an interview and the interview could be an hour long, if we're having like dramatic lighting changes coming from the window during that hour, and then later on we're trying to put together an edit, and we're cutting between the shots, and one of them is a lot darker than the other, then we might struggle to tell like a coherent story because the lighting is drastically different. So then any lights that we have within the location that we're in, just to try them out and see, oh, what does this light do? Is that helpful? Does it look better? Does it make it look worse? If we have any curtains or blinds, does it look better if they're closed? Does it look better if they're open? And so it's kind of just detecting what light sources do we have, and how can we use them to make things look as good as possible. That's basically all it is. So and then obviously you can use like lights, additional lights as well. And there we recommend like ring lights, and we don't recommend using the phone light because it's just a little bit too harsh, and tends to not be the most flattering lighting. A lot of times what I do with my lights, so I have some LED lights that I bring onto my shoots, and if we need additional lighting, then I tend to use reflective light. So rather than pointing the lights directly at the subject, I point it against like the walls, for example, and then the reflective light will sort of come back onto the subject, and it's a lot softer and usually a lot more flattering than pointing it directly at the person.
So here, ask a quick question.
Yeah.
So I know that you mentioned that ring lights might be a good idea, but do you have any other recommendations? Because I find that ring lights can be quite harsh too.
Yeah, so I think Emma is gonna send around like a kit list of like affordable equipment that we recommend.
Okay.
I mean, I think all lights can be harsh.
Yeah.
If they're pointed maybe too close, so it might be worth just taking them a little bit further away. Some of them have settings for like the white balance of how warm or cold the lighting looks, and that could make a difference. And also it could have a setting how strong the lighting comes through. So my lights, for example, they go like up to 100%, and so maybe I'll put them at like 60% or something like that. And then it might also be worth if you find that the lighting is still harsh, I sometimes put like sort of just like what is it called, like a soft cloth in front of it to diffuse, like a diffuser. I think it's called just like a diffusing kind of cloth, to just to soften the light with that as well. So it could be, if you find that your light is a bit too harsh, I would try either positioning it a little bit further away, playing with the intensity, or if you find that it's still really strong, to see if you can maybe put some diffusing cloth in front of it.
Okay, brilliant. Thank you.
Okay, no problem. So here now, so I've talked a little bit about light that is reflecting and how we can work with this. Here's like a really good example of a DIY reflector. And it's basically just a cardboard with a white muslin cloth in front of it. And so on the left-hand side, we have it without that. And on the right-hand side, we just reflect that light that's coming through the window back onto the subject, which is the dog. And it's quite impressive how much of a difference it makes, isn't it? So this is like something really simple that anybody, you know, can do. But a reflecting source could be anything. It could be, for example, again, in my scenario right now, where I've got the window here, and then the light is coming through and it's reflecting off this wall, right? So not only do I have light coming from the front and from the top lights, but it's also reflecting from this wall and coming back. So that's something that's useful to keep in mind. Framing and background. So this is where we have to make some really important decisions, and we got to decide whether we're filming in portrait or landscape. So portrait is filming like this, and landscape is filming like this. And that really comes down to where is the video going to be viewed. If you know it's only going on like TikTok and Instagram, then I would recommend just filming in a portrait, because that's how it's going to be viewed. But if the video is going to go on a website or YouTube, then it might be worth filming it in landscape, just because that is the most common way of viewing it there. What we tend to do is to film it in landscape, but to keep in mind that there might be a portrait edit. And so in the framing, I usually just make sure that it would still look good if it will be edited into vertical. And again, if we're filming in 4K, then we can edit it into vertical without losing too much quality. So that's good to keep in mind. In terms of the background, we want the background to support the story that we're telling, and we definitely don't want it to distract. So if we're having a shot and there's something in the background, I don't know, a pink elephant, a huge pink elephant in the background, then everybody watching the interview will be distracted and will be asking, why is there a big pink elephant in the background when we're talking about fundraising for this charity? So the images that we have here on the right-hand side, we can tell the first one is like a classic interview shot. And the background, we can't really tell what it is. It looks like it might be a kitchen or something, but it's blurry and there's nothing too distracting in the background. so that's an example of like where we can really just focus on the subject. And then the second image is something where actually the background kind of supports the story. And Emma, do you want to tell us a little bit about that video that you guys worked on?
Yeah, so this was a video of a man called Fishery in Albania, and he collected rubbish. That was how he made his living. So we wanted to kind of film him in his where he was and at his job basically. So that was why we had that as a background, because it kind of supported what he was saying. And it can actually work nicely as well if you're filming an event, or say for example there's a sport, you've got some sport activity going on. If you're interviewing kind of with that going on in the background, it can really help support and bring to life what the people are speaking about. Just make sure that it's not too distracting, so that it is a bit blurred. And you can do that by doing that auto focus on the person that you're interviewing. So yeah, it can be something that's not distracting, but then it can also be something that can really help support what you're speaking about. Did you have a question, Laura?
Hi, yeah. How do you get that blurred background? So, the focus on that top image is obviously on the woman, and then the background is slightly blurred. How do you get that?
Yeah, so on the phone, so on the camera, it's usually just the lens that you're using. And it's basically if the aperture, the f-stop, if you put it quite low, then it will sort of blur the background like that. On the camera, it depends on the phone and the functions that you have. But here it has to do with the focus. So if I'm focusing here, I can tell, let me see if I can get something here. So let me see if I can, so here, for example, I'm having those glasses that I'm just holding in front of my camera. And now I've put the glasses in focus. I don't know if you can see that properly, but now the background is blurry.
Yeah, and if you use that autofocus lock thing that we showed you,
yeah,
then I've just done on mine as well. It does, if you just lock onto by holding down on mine, which is an Android, onto the person that you're filming, then it will just automatically blur slightly the background. But also as well, if you have them just closer as well and have a good amount of distance between them and the background, so they're not really close to it. So you'd want them a good 5-10 meters behind the where you're interviewing.
So it seems like on the phone camera, it seems like you just need to be like further away from it to make sure that blur comes out. I know with the photography on the phone, I know that there's like the portrait kind of mode where you can blur it a little bit more in the background. But I don't have, at least on my phone, I don't have that for video. But I'm sure that is probably something that newer phones will develop, where you can have that more extreme with the blur in the background. But it might be right now, you might just have to bring the subject fairly close. Yeah.
Thank you.
Great. Other things we want to look out for. So again, we can tell that here with the interview shot, again, the subject is kind of aligned with one of the vertical lines and is sort of on one side of the framing, and they're looking towards the other side, the empty space sort of the frame. And that's usually when we film the interviews, we have the camera at eye level. So we want to make sure we're filming at eye level, have the lens at eye level with the person. And then if we're filming interview style, we sort of put ourselves next to the camera so that they can look at us and talk to us. And that's how we get that look of documentary style interviews. If you're filming vertical, then usually you will have the person just central, right? So so that's important to keep in mind as well. Sort of the alignment on the side is usually just for when we're filming in landscape mode. And just on the note of like filming interviews, they can sometimes, if you want to get into like if you're having longer interviews, it's definitely worth investing in a mobile tripod. that is something that, you know, we found really helpful, because you want to be able to focus on the interview. And if the interview goes on for longer, it can be challenging to look at the person and look at your shot at the same time. So having a tripod can be really helpful, where you set up your shot, and then you can just focus on the interview and getting the best out of that, rather than having to worry about, you know, doing the framing constantly with your hands.
Yeah, and on the eye level thing as well, it can hurt your knees. But if you're filming children or people that are shorter than you, or maybe they're in a wheelchair, like being on their level, so getting down on their level, so you are at their eye level. Just, it's nicer to watch, but it's also, from an ethical perspective, doesn't feel like you're looking down on people. You're like at the same level as them. So I think it's like, yeah, I do it now with my kids, and I like follow them around with my camera on their level. And it's like, just for me, nicer to watch, you know, when you put them to bed and then you sit and watch videos of them for hours. So it's just, yeah, it's just nice to be on the person's level, whether that's you have to go higher because they're taller, or you have to go lower because they're lower than you.
Great. Yeah, thanks, Emma. That's so true. And also, just like one more note before we move on to sound, with the framing and the lighting and everything, it's getting the lighting right. For example, it's not just a matter of like it looking good and looking flattering. It's also, if we remember that image of the man standing in front of the window where we can hardly make out the face, it is also an accessibility issue. If we can't see the lips moving, then that can also be an accessibility issue. And so it is important, from a practical point of view, to make sure to have, you know, a good amount of lighting on the subject. But equally important is sound. So this is something that I often see neglected when it comes to social media content, and it can be really distracting if the sound is not properly audible. We got to remember that sound makes 50% of our video. And so yes, I do think it's worth spending some time on and effort on getting it right. Again, we want to make sure that we become really aware of the sound and the noise level in the space that we are. That's the first thing we got to do. So when we're setting up to film, and we're just going to listen out, okay, is there some air conditioning that maybe is running in the background that we've never really paid attention to, but now that we're, you know, getting it on a microphone, it's really distracting. Or maybe there's some roadworks going on outside, and we got to make sure to close the window to make sure to not get that too loud on the microphone. So that's the first thing we're going to do, is just pay attention, and then possibly move to a different space if we can't control the noise and the distractions. That includes wind. So wind can be a big issue on shoots, because it can really mess if we're, you know, if we're having the microphone and the wind blows against it, it can create some really loud noise on the sound, and be a big issue. So we want to make sure to stay out of the wind, and there are some things that can help with wind issues. So on the image on the right hand side, we can see that there's like a little protector on the microphone, and that is something that helps with any wind issues. But ideally, we just want to remove the issue, right? We just want to get out of the wind and get to a space where we don't have that problem. Then we have our microphone on the phone, right? And the closer we get to the microphone, the better the sound is going to be. But obviously, then it can become an issue if it's quite noisy outside and we get like really close, then we can't get the video shot that we maybe want to get. And for that, we do recommend that you might want to use headphones. So there's like some great Bluetooth headphones that could be a great bit of kit to get. So I've got these ones here, and they're just in this little case. You might have some already, and they have a microphone on them. So so for example, I use mine when I'm driving, and and people can hear me clearly. So this is something that you could use. You could pair it with your phone, right? So that you get the sound from them into your phone. And then when you're filming, or when somebody's filming you, you could just, you know, put them in your ear and speak, and the sound will be picked up by your phone and paired automatically. Obviously, before you're filming like a long segment, make sure to test it. And that is with any new bit of gear that you might be introducing. Yeah, Laura?
Sorry, I just want to say that we purchased some wireless microphones, and they have the little jacket on for the really windy, and they are so useful. We've been able to film out and about when it's windy in noisy locations, and you can still hear the person speaking really clearly. So when it comes to editing, it's just made it a lot easier.
Brilliant.
Yeah. I think they were like £20 or something. So
yeah,
you can get some wireless microphones really easily. It just makes your life a lot easier when you're kind of editing.
Yeah, great. No, thank you, Laura. That's so true. There's just these little pieces of kit that aren't very expensive, but if you're, you know, if you know you're going to be making a lot of content, it might be really worth investing into those. And I think one of the wireless microphones are like a really good way of doing it, or the headphones work as well. But yeah, these are definitely like really useful pieces of kit. Great. So that is sort of the sound. If you can invest in equipment, kind of just what I said, I think the main things are the tripod, I think, is super, super useful. It just opens up, especially if you're filming content on your own and you don't have a team of people, it just opens up a whole new world of things that you can do. The microphone, really, really useful. And having some light, a ring light, or like just like a little battery operated light, can be really, really useful as well. Interview techniques, again, during the pre-production, I would definitely have your questions prepared before you get to the interview. You don't want to be in the interview and then start, you know, talking to your team about, oh, what questions do we want to ask? And it's also worth preparing before the interview to make sure you don't need to constantly look at your sheet at the questions that you have. To at least have like some of the most important questions memorized, so that you can get into a flow of like a natural conversation, and it doesn't feel like just ticking off a list of things. We want to make sure that we're, you know, that we can be ourselves, and that our interviewee can also feel like they can be themselves and in a safe space, and just be themselves, just be natural. The third thing on this list, it says include context. Does anybody have an idea of what that might mean?
Is that when we do this, but is that when you don't want to have yourself heard? You know, if you're asking someone a question, you don't want that to be on the video, but if they're answering a question, that you kind of need to know what question they're answering, so you ask them to start by including the question in their answer.
Exactly, yeah. And there, it's always worth having a chat with the interviewee kind of before you start, but also during the interview, to keep reminding them if they forget, that it's not during the editing process. You'll realize that it's not very useful just to have the answer without the context of what the answer is in. So so if, you know, if, for example, if you ask someone, you know, what did you have for breakfast, and they say, oh, I had, you know, had eggs, then just having the answer being eggs is not that useful for the edit. We would need to have, for breakfast, I had eggs today. So in terms of like a charity event, that might be, you know, asking, oh, what are we raising funds for today? And if the interviewee says, for our support system of this, then that alone would not be that useful during the edit. We would want them to say, today, this fundraiser is about this, right? So that including context is like incredibly important, and especially when you're editing the footage, you'll notice how useful it is to have that. So that's good to keep in mind. We want to ask open questions, and so just to encourage again the interviewee to tell the story in a natural way, and we really need to make sure to listen to what they're saying. And if there's anything where we're like, oh, I don't quite understand that, or there's a little gap there that we need to, you know, discuss and talk a little bit more about, then to follow up and make sure that we get there.
Yeah, I'd just add as well from an ethical perspective, when you're interviewing people, it's really important that you have a conversation with them before about what they are happy to share and what they're not happy to share, because it just makes them feel like they're in control, which they are and they should be. But you can, you know, say, is there anything you don't want to share with me today, or is there anything you don't want us to talk about? And just make sure that they feel really safe and comfortable before you start interviewing them, and that, you know, there is opportunities for them to have breaks, and that you check in with them after as well to make sure that they're okay. And that's not just straight away, it could be like, you know, 2-3 days after. And those questions as well, some of them that are really helpful are things for getting them to build a picture. So it might be like, could you tell me what did life look like for you before you heard of this charity, or how's life changed for you? So getting them to almost like visually build the picture of the impact that you've had. And always, and I say this to so many charities and organizations, make sure you ask questions about how your organization has helped them, because otherwise, if you're asking for fundraising or trying to show impact or why you exist as an organization, it's great to have people's stories, but you have to bring in how you've helped as well.
Yeah.
But yeah.
So here now we've got a little video example, and I've talked about like how to get like the, you know, good lighting and how to get like great sound. But ultimately, I think that like a creative idea and just like an authentic story is like so powerful. And this is like an example of a video where we gave Ellie, the girl in the video, a camera, and kind of just asked the family to just capture their everyday lives. And I thought it made some really compelling storytelling.
My parents just left to go to the local doctors because they have to learn how to inject Hayden if he ever misses his steroids in the morning. It's quite stressful being home alone because I've got to make sure Hayden's all right, and I have to look after the dog, which doesn't sound like much, but I'm at home alone with a severely disabled brother. It's not even a long amount of time. They'll be out for about 20 minutes. The doctor's not very far away. The filling of the tablet, there's a tablet dispenser.
Deflazacort steroids keep his muscles going.
They're very important.
They are
Agreed.
very important.
Oh, too hot, too
Is
hot.
that too sorry?
And then the other one.
Yep. Straighten your leg then.
Nice.
What are you doing? Are you okay?
No, go away!
So yeah, as well as having Duchenne and a genetic disorder, I don't know if it's part of the drugs or stuff, or whether it's just the way he is, but he's also partly on the autistic spectrum. So these outbursts will happen, you know, once a day, a couple of times a day, sometimes. It's just never knowing what to do when he kicks off. I just sort of sit there and hope it's gonna stop, and it sometimes doesn't. Two times 24.
48.
Yay. Wait a minute. Have I worked out volume or surface area? Please Google how to do it.
Smile.
Nice face you've got there.
And I know when I need it, I can count on you. Like 4, 3, 2, you'll be there. 'Cause that's what friends are supposed to do. Oh yeah.
really lovely little video, and it just shows that that behind the scenes, that just like capturing what's happening at home can be, you know, so powerful when bringing that message across. Next up, we've got the post-production. So this is now, we've filmed all our footage, we've captured all our content, and now we're going to try and edit it. For that, we'll need some kind of editing tool, some kind of software or app. And these are just like a few that you might be familiar with. So iMovie and Clipchamp have been around for like ages. I think I started on iMovie like 15 years ago. And yeah, they're like free softwares that are really straightforward to use. CapCut is a really popular one for social media clips. And Adobe Rush, so Adobe Premiere is what we use at the Saltways. And Rush is like a stripped down version of that. So that might be if you want to have, you know, maybe a little bit of a more powerful, you know, software. This might be something that you could check out. And then you can also edit within the social media platforms like TikTok and Instagram. And those are also like really, really easy to use and straightforward. Ultimately, you know, whatever you use, they all do the same thing. So whatever works for you, I think, is the right editing tool. When we're editing, so the process usually looks something like this. Obviously, you might have your own way of doing things, but we want to watch all the content we have. Sometimes you can do this like in a sped up way, but especially for the interviews, it's usually useful to watch them in real time, and to keep the messaging in mind, that of what you want to bring across. And then, so we watch it all, then we watch it again, and this time we're gonna maybe take some notes, and we're gonna maybe make some cuts where we find what we call a hook. And what is a hook? A hook is just something that can basically stop people from scrolling and go like, oh, what is this? Those are the kind of pieces of like from the interview where we really want to make sure we keep that for the final edit. So we're gonna watch it again, look out for the hooks, maybe put in some markers or take some notes of like some sentences that really stand out to us. And then we're gonna take the bits that we like, and we're gonna play around with the order and put it, you know, basically put together a storyline of the video, and always keep in mind the viewer's journey along the way. Then once we've got sort of the interview pieced together, we're gonna look out for the other footage we have. So there we've got the B-roll, the behind the scenes, anything else that we filmed. And what can be a really great way to visually support the story is to cut away while the speaker is talking about something in particular. If we have other visuals, other footage to support that, then we might cut that, you know, have the interview going underneath that, and then put some footage on top of that kind of supports the story. So once we've put that all together, then we add music, graphics, and subtitles. And with the subtitles, we need to make sure, that comes afterwards. I'm gonna let Emma talk about the Andy test first.
Yeah, so this is my poor husband that doesn't know he's actually featured in this. And this is an experiment that I would encourage you to do once you have your kind of edit ready. Is I usually show bits of content that we've created to my husband, because he can't hide when he's bored on his face. So I watch him watching stuff, and then I'll ask him questions like, what do you think the message was with that? Can you tell me what the charity does? How did it make you feel? So you're kind of testing it on those messaging that you put together, those questions you put together at the start. You test on someone external, not someone that's in your charity because they're too close to it, or your organization. Test on someone that ideally doesn't know much about what the work you do, and that can't lie, basically. And just make sure that you've covered those points, and that they go away with that really clear message or that call to action or that action you want them to take. Yeah, and if they don't, you need to go back to the edit and find out bits of footage that where you could take stuff in, add stuff in or take stuff out to help you really get to that message.
Yeah, no, I think that's such a good idea. And what I would also say is to take a step away from it. Once you've got like maybe the first draft of your video, I like to step away from it and maybe come back the next day with fresh eyes, because it is sometimes we just get sucked into the whole thing and we're too close to it sometimes. So either go out for a walk, come back to it, but also definitely the next day. I always find that the next day is like a really good way to just view it again as if you're seeing it for the first time. And then you might be like, oh, actually that thing that, that I thought was really interesting yesterday, actually that takes away from the story, and I'm going to cut some of that and just cut it down a little bit more. So so I definitely recommend that as well. Accessibility, so that's what I was going to start before. Just make sure with the subtitles and the graphics that they're really clear and simple and not difficult to see. We have put on here as well a link for an accessibility checker, and this is something that we do now in all of our videos, just to make sure that the subtitles and the other the other graphics are easy to view. Usually the most common problem is that, for example, if the subtitles are in white as they are here, that there might be some shots where the background suddenly gets really bright, and then they might be difficult to see. So so that's a really useful free resource that we definitely recommend that you use. Okay.
So as we always say to everybody,
before I start that video, just quickly to say this next video that we're going to show is a really good example of like capturing the atmosphere of a place. And this is something that we always try to do, and that we definitely recommend you try to do as well. Again, it comes to like filming the behind the scenes, but also here we definitely have like a backdrop that's kind of supporting the message and the story that we're trying to tell.
So as we always say to everybody, the best way to experience the yard is to come on in. Loads of fun, every corner there's something happening. Hi buddy, you all right? So the art room, don't touch anything because you get covered in paint, we always do. Simple things, a bit of music, a few toys. You know, you'll find some children just gravitate towards a musical instrument and they'll sit there for hours. We try and join in, try and encourage that. Going to the outside, I think it's dry out there now. Bikes, skateboards. Hi buddy. And as you can see, even in the wettest, coldest winter months, the water's still a favourite. Hi! The yard is all about children and their needs and supporting them. But it goes further than that. We support the families.
So it's for children who have a disability, it's for their brothers, their sisters. It's really an open house, and what we try and do is create a home from home that allows people to come and relax and just have a little bit of fun.
And we just make sure everybody's involved, everybody's included.
That no matter how hard that day is, or how hard life can feel at that moment, you have support, and no family wants to feel alone when they're facing things that are difficult. So when you open the yard door, I think you're opening up a whole community of support.
When you first come in, it's just a great feeling. Oh, whoa, who was that? By the end of the day, you've been running around for 4 or 5 hours and you go away exhausted, but you know that every child, or that's our aim, every child has fun of some sort.
For families, you get support and you see your children happy and you feel that they're safe, you don't feel judged, you can genuinely relax. And for children, they can just play, and there's nothing better than that.
Okay, great. Do we have any questions at all?
I have one. Hope you don't
Yeah.
mind. Just a little bit about lighting and sound, like from previously from doing a lot of filming in sports halls, which are sometimes the worst with squeaky floors, and no natural light whatsoever. Is there any sort of hints and tips that you might give around doing that? I found it quite difficult in the past. I know you've given some.
Yeah. So what kind of microphones? I can imagine that could be really tricky. I can imagine that must be quite a tricky situation. What have you tried so far?
Well, sometimes you're just feeling, like a shot of the whole sort of session that might be going on, and sometimes that feels like it's too busy and you don't quite know what's sort of happening. And it's usually like you get this horrendous fluorescent orange light. And
okay. So do you think is it more the lighting that's the problem, or the sound, or is it both?
The lighting.
The
yeah.
lighting. Okay, cool. Is there any natural light at all?
In some of them, they can be. They have the tiny sort of top windows. You know what I'm talking about? Those in school halls that you might have a curtain or something like that. But some just don't have any at all, and it's it could be quite overstimulating for some of the young people that we work with. But I just wondered if there was any way sometimes of sort of getting round that, or is it more a case that you would have to do things quite close up and focused?
I'm trying to think. So with the fluorescent light, does it just get quite yellowy, or do you get the flimmer?
Yes, quite yellowy, and often yellowy. Films come out quite a horrible color.
Yeah. So with the color, so I've got a free color correction plugin that I use, and it's for the white balance. So the white balance is generally how warm or cold like an image is, right? And the way to check that is usually like on the color, we try and make sure if we're having an image, for example, that if there's something white in the image, that it's actually white. And if it looks like yellow or like green or like bluish, then the white balance is off. So on the phone, that's not as easy to set as on the camera. On the camera, you go to the white balance and you adjust it, but we might not have that option on the phone. So this is something that you might need to address in post-production. And let me quickly, it's called RT. Let me quickly get the link. RT.
The other thing as well with the the sound is what I would probably do if I was just doing something on my phone is I'd interview the people maybe out of that room. So if you're doing an interview with someone, and then I'd just use the B-roll of the activities happening, but not the sound of that room necessarily if there's a lot of squeaking and hopping. So you're just using like the audio from the interview and then the B-roll of the action happening. Just if you needed to do it quickly and you didn't have a lot of time to spend playing around with things in the edit, I would probably just do that if I was just wanting to get something out there quickly.
I think that's a really good idea. And I'm realizing with this plugin that it's that this one is like a Final Cut specific one, so it might not work. But if you are in your editing software, we see if you can look for white balance, and that might be helpful. But I agree with Emma that it might just be a matter of like filming in a way that that sort of avoids that issue as much as possible. And then you were also mentioning the sound. Do you have like a little clip-on mic or something like that you're using?
No, but I think I'm going to purchase one. I think that's be a good idea.
I think that might help significantly with that. And again, it might be an idea to, if it's too noisy in the background, even with the microphone, again, just check it, see how it works. And if it's still too noisy, then you might just have to do the interview in the quieter location and then add in the other shots later on.
Thank you. That's really helpful.
No problem.
Laura?
Sorry, Gemma, I was just saying that Yulia, I don't know if this helps, but when I've used CapCut, which is a free editing software program, and it's really, really useful, there's an option on it it automatically uses AI to automatically color correct the I don't know, is that something that would be able to help? Because literally I just click it, and sometimes it takes a few minutes to go through the whole file and kind of color correct all the scenes, but it just does it automatically and it's completely free to use. So I don't know if that might.
Yeah,
That sounds
CapCut
amazing.
is brilliant. There's so many like filters on it as well that you could probably play around with CapCut.
Thank you.
Anna?
Yeah.
I was wondering how long a video should be or how short.
I think it depends on what it's for. So if it's for social media and it's something that, like, I don't know, you want to show part of your service, I wouldn't go over, like, 60 seconds is probably a good amount of time, especially if you're putting on platforms where there's like time limits of how long you can put it on for. However, if it's someone's story and it's something that's really engaging, I think you can go up to 3 minutes, because if it's interesting, people will still watch it. And a lot of the time, if you're trying to build a connection with someone, trying to squash that into a minute, you just can't. And it's almost like you're doing their story a disservice, because you're trying to probably condense something that's really, like, it's something really detailed into something that's snappy for social media. So I think, like, be brave, and like, if don't be ruled by it has to be a minute, because we usually work with charities and they say we want it to be a minute, and then when we show them the cut and we say, well, this is 3 minutes, what do you want to take out? And they say nothing. So it's like, let the stories dictate that almost a little bit. But if it's just little snappy things, if you wanted to say, join us on Tuesday night, we've got this great session happening, that could be like 20 seconds. But I think if it's something a bit more emotive, it's fine to let it go for longer.
Yeah,
It's reassuring. Thank you.
And I think when it comes to social media, it's so interesting because the landscape is like constantly changing about, what's encouraged to do. And I've now noticed on like TikTok, for example, that there's a lot of people who have like these really long videos and they're talking and they're telling the story, and the videos are like 5 to 10 minutes long. And but if it's interesting enough, people will watch it, right? At the same time, we do a lot of times, like, research shows that people, skip, obviously, in like the first like 15 to 30 seconds is sort of the deciding factor. So what's important, I think, is to make those first 15 seconds as interesting as possible. And that's where that hook comes in, like anything that's super interesting. You also see it quite often that people will put something, a hook, like a funny bit that happens in the middle of the longer video at the very beginning, and then they start the video. And so that is something that you can do as well. Just be like, oh yeah, there's something funny coming up.
Yeah, I'd always as well say start with someone's face, because people are more likely to engage with a person than they are, like, a logo, for example. And find like a line that just intrigues people. So it could be something like, coming here has changed my life, and that just makes you want to, like, oh, why, what happened, like that, rather than, my name is Emma and I've been coming here for 4 years. Like, it's just not as interesting to watch. So you want them to feel like, yeah, you'll know when you're watching the footage, you'll be like, oh, there's a hook, there's a hook, there's a hook. And that's how you can, like, start building. And I know some editors, I don't know if you do this, Julia, but start with the hook and then edit from that, or start with the finish and then edit from that. So it's however best you work. But I think always be on the lookout for that thing that will stop people from scrolling.
So it's like a newspaper article.
Yeah, exactly.
Headline. Yeah. Thank you.
And I think that's such a good point, Emma, that it's like trying to get away from what you want to show and just think more about what is interesting for the person watching it. And that, for example, that hook of like, oh, this has changed my life. Somebody watching it might be like, oh, I want to change my life. How has it changed your life? You want to get that information, rather than being like, this is what we do. This is, I think that's a really good way of thinking, like, what is the audience interested in? And then, obviously also you want to tell them what you do as a charity, but that might just come a little bit later in the video, and then by then they might be engaged with the story and yeah, interested in that.